in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. A lot of news going to cover. One thing I want to kind of start off with is something that's still in the news. Is about Chris Kyle, American Sniper, and the trial that's going on with his murderer right now. I played Adam Kokesh talking about part of this, but there was an interesting one with Dr. Drew on HLN. And Adam's, doing his normal spiel. I've already played it, and he's hitting on some relevant points, but it's one of those things that we already know how the mainstream wants to spin it, and he seems to get his mic cut. So I'm going to play this clip, and it goes back to the patriotic thing. We should stand behind them and put them in situations where their actions conflict with their morals, therefore they have issues afterwards. A lot of times we don't address that. They either have these moral dilemmas with what they've done, or they figure out a way to shut it off. And I think Chris Kyle was more than likely one that was able to shut it off and try to justify it in his mind. And as long as he stayed in that mentality, killing's cool, killing's good, it's patriotic, he was okay. That was his way of coping with it. Others, I think, have a complete different, they can't, get past that point. And that's when they either, start harming themselves, or they take action to try to make up for what they feel they've done. But you think, well, this is Dr. Drew. He's a propagandist tool for the mainstream media and the powers to be. So I'm going to play this clip here. And this is Dr. Drew on HLN discussing Chris Kyle and the case going on right now.
He ended the conversation, and it turns out that was the last time that Drew spoke. So it was just a really emotional kind of testimony that she gave.
Oh, so tragic. Martin, thank you so much for that report. Let's bring in our Behavior Bureau. Jesse Jane Duff, Gunnery Sergeant, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, Senior Fellow with the London Center for Policy Research. Adam Kokesh, Iraq War veteran, YouTube star. Leanne Tweeden. Jesse, I guess I'll start with you. Insanity is a particularly problematic defense in Texas. He's got a bunch of things stacked against him, including that he smoked pot and drank that morning. Do you feel that's relevant? You're laughing.
It's absolutely yes, it's absolutely relevant that here comes his defense attorney trying to say, my client's insane. However, he was smoking weed laced with other drugs and taking shots of whiskey before he voluntarily left with these men who he felt threatened by. It's a contradiction itself. If you get a DUI and you kill somebody while you're under the influence, you're still held accountable. So don't try to push the insanity on me when you have altered yourself and your state of mind. And if he's actually a victim of PTSD or has PTSD, he's probably on some form of medication that also says don't use use alcohol or drugs.
Right.
So to me, it's a complete contradiction.
Now, the defense attorney also brought up a text message exchange, which if you haven't heard about this, it was very interesting, between Chris Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield. They were driving to the gun range with Eddie Ray Routh. In the backseat behind him, there it is, Chris Kyle's text. This dude is straight up nuts. Littlefield responds, they're sitting next to each other. He's right beside me. Watch my six. Adam, does this help this guy's defense, or does the substances we've been discussing adulterate even the fact that they knew he was out of his mind that morning?
Well, I think when you go through the process of joining the military and going through all that, which is in and of itself an act of either cowardice, ignorance, greed, or insanity in and of itself, you understand the idea of moral agency and taking responsibility for your actions. So it really doesn't matter. He did it. He knows he did it. Whether it was right or wrong, he's a threat to society, and that needs to be addressed.
Leanne, there was a lot packed into what he just said. I wonder if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I think he's right. I think this guy knew exactly what he was doing. I think if we go back and look at his history, he's been a troubled man for a long time. I don't think the excuse of PTSD is even valid here. Sure, maybe he did have some PTSD. I don't even think when he was deployed, he was outside of the wire. So I know a lot of my friends who have seen combat up close and personal don't even like to call people that have PTSD that have been inside the wire. It could be because it kind of it maybe takes away from other people who really have it and who really need the help. And even one of my friends who was attached to Navy SEAL teams and who knew Chris Kyle said, look, if you look at who has PTSD, if you didn't attach a disability payment to it by the VA, only probably 2% of the people out there really have PTSD that need to get help. I think this guy was mentally ill long before he joined the Marines. Look at his history. Terrible, terrible history.
And I don't want to minimize the severity of mental illness. Adam, you packed a lot into that statement you just made. You said anybody who goes into the military, I think you said, has mental illness.
No, joining the military itself is either an act of ignorance, cowardice, greed, or insanity.
Hold on, stop.
I don't agree with that
Jesse,
at all.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't agree.
Jesse.
Well, it's about moral responsibility here, and for people trying to say like that Routh is not responsible because he had PTSD or he was a combat veteran. You know, it's the same argument they use for the troops and the great atrocities that are committed abroad in the name of freedom. You know, but just following orders, or I had PTSD, or I was lied to by the government, those aren't excuses for killing children, for torturing people, for making enemies faster than we can kill them in these wars.
Jesse.
Okay, I find it very insulting that you've come to the conclusion on why I joined. There was one element you missed: pride and honor in my country. There was no cowardice, and yet there was no sense of it's pride.
Yeah, pride is an ignorant
determine
sin.
from the rest of us. The second thing is 7.7 million Americans have PTSD. This is not isolated to the military, and it is not insanity. It's an anxiety disorder. It's also associated with stress and overcompulsion. So there are many degrees of PTSD, and many people don't understand what PTSD actually is. 7.7 million Americans have it. And so let's get that off the table.
And PTSD also doesn't make you want to kill your brother in arms.
It can make you do something terrible and impulsive in a flashback, but people riding next to you in a car aren't going to say, hey, there's something weird about this guy. I'm scared. Watch my back. That's something else. The debate over Chris Kyle's killer continues, and later...
The two men were trying to help Routh cope with his post-traumatic stress disorder after the war, when Routh allegedly just shot them dead.
He had killed them before they could kill him, and that he was going to take their soul before they could take his soul.
Mental illnesses, even the ones that this defendant may or may not have, don't deprive people of the ability to be good citizens, to know right from wrong.
Chris Kyle was sitting in the driver's seat on his telephone, and he texts Chad Littlefield sitting right next to him. He texts him that this dude is straight up nuts.
Back with Jesse Adam and joining us, Annalise Getz, attorney. I want you to hear, all of you, from Chris Kyle's wife when she was asked about PTSD and using PTSD as a murder defense. Take a listen.
I think what it does, it makes me feel very, very protective for people who legitimately have PTSD, because we know a lot of them, they're wonderful people. They serve in justice-related fields. They have huge hearts, so when something traumatic happens, they can suffer from it. But it doesn't change their character. They carry guns. They love their families. They might be moody. They might lose some sleep. But it does not, absolutely not, 100% does not turn you into a cold-blooded killer.
Adam, do you agree with Chris Kyle's wife?
Oh, absolutely. But let's step back for a second and look at the bigger problem of militarism. And I just want to point out that Gunny here, when in the last segment was confronted with a statement she didn't like, instead of responding rationally, responded emotionally. And that's really behind the idea of joining the military in the first place. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of misleading young people. And it really is insanity to think that it's going to help our country to go and kill for politicians, to be brave and fight the threat of terrorism when the big threat is government here at home.
Jesse, respond.
Oh, I find that ludicrous. I didn't respond emotionally. I did respond rationally. I did join for pride, and you didn't include that in your statement. So just keep that in mind. With this said about PTSD, again, 7.7 million Americans have PTSD. It is not just isolated to the military. And with this said, this man, Ruth, also has been identified to have psychiatric issues, probably completely separate from PTSD. And I hope it is identified.
I didn't have a emotion. It was pride. Well, pride is an expression of emotion. It's that ability to have ignorance because you have so much pride. You know, we have it in our personal lives where you have so much pride you don't want to back down and end up, you know, putting yourself, you know, your foot in your mouth, or, you know, people experience pride in everyday life, so it is a emotion. You believe so much in it, and you believe in your country and what you're doing so much that you're willing to do it, even though you're ignorant of what you're actually doing. It's an emotional response. So I think that's pretty funny how it's not emotion, it's pride.
But in order for him to get off due to insanity, he's going to have to demonstrate that he didn't know the difference, because the state of Texas is very clear about that. In your insanity claim, you have to not know the difference.
Right. And I want to show you what he did. Annalise, since you're the attorney, I'm going to have you respond to this. After the shootings, Ralph stole Chris Kyle's truck, confessed to his sister, who then called 911. When the police came, he led them on a brief chase before surrendering and confessing. He seemed to know he'd done something wrong and took multiple actions in response to understanding that the rest of us perceived he had done something wrong.
I think that definitely the prosecution is going to hit on that. But what we're really going to target, what we're going to look at is what was his state of mind when the murder happened, when the crime happened. Now, the prosecutor is going to look at this and say, well, look at everything he did afterwards. And this is fair game. It's fair game in Texas. They can say, did he flee the scene? He might have fled the scene. We know that he left. Did he?
Okay, I'm going to try to cut to the spot where it appears that they cut Adam's mic. And I understand Adam gets a little off topic, but he's trying to cram a message into the mainstream media. That way, listeners that are mainstream type people, they don't go off of the status quo. They stick right to it, get injected with this type of information. But it's really relevant to a outlook at the situation that if we're going to talk about murder and we're going to talk about Chris Kyle as a hero, not everybody believes this. So let me try to find the spot here. I'm going to start it from here.
Service, and at least to people who have mental illness, people who have PTSD, because they don't go around killing people, and then they don't run away from it. If they really think that the devil's after them, they talk about the devil being after them, or that they killed the devil in somebody else, they did a good thing. They don't run away from the police. When they come to and realize they've done something, sometimes they'll tear their hair out, realizing that they were distorted. He did none of those things, showed no remorse, but fled. Jesse.
But his psychotic episode may have actually been over by that point in time. You look at when
you just described the voices, and all the psychotic symptoms. That's not over.
You have to agree with me when someone's hearing voices and smelling pigs
that's psychotic.
That is psychotic. So that furthers the argument. This guy was not in his right mind. Did he really understand right from wrong? Okay. I don't think he did. You've got all kinds of doctors saying that he was a threat to society, and they released him anyway.
Oh, listen, I'm not going to give a pass to the system. I'm telling you what. And by the way, the system is not just flawed. The system is you talk about smelling the pigs. It's hogtied. Doctors can't do their job. Because there's no resources there.
If I may, Dr.
Please,
Drew,
tell me.
I ran a peer support group for veterans with PTSD when I got back from Iraq. And when you go through the military experience, you go through combat, you come home and you're really confused about what's right or wrong because politicians and commanders have been filling your head with lies. And so dealing with PTSD positively through talk therapy increases a sense of right and wrong. It's a great discovery process for a lot of people. And I would say that most veterans who come home and deal with their PTSD in a rational way by talking it out and getting in touch with their experiences, coming face to face with the crimes they committed, the moral transgressions, they get a better sense of right and wrong.
It's a little more complicated than that, but you're right to some extent. Jesse, I'm going to give you the last word here. Let me just say, for the record, I don't like people flying planes into buildings, and I'm grateful that people go out there and help defend us, whether we do it the right way or the wrong way.
That's not true either, Drew.
I know. Listen, I don't argue about why it happened or should have happened. I'm just grateful that somebody's trying. Adam, I'm going to hold you. Turn his mic off. Turn his mic off. Jesse, I want to give you a chance to say the final word here. Not that I wouldn't want to hear from Adam. It's just I don't have time. And I want to just say I'm grateful that people are out there. I don't know if it's right or wrong, how they do it or when they do it or who.
As a United States Marine. So that on itself is a faulty argument because that was his experience, not my own. With that also said, if we're going to say this guy was crazy, he was also under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So we don't know what his state of mind was because he wasn't sober. Right. He willingly took those drugs.
I don't think the drugs were a big issue. What I think is that he is somebody that you're right, did know to take a substance, but he might have been seeking relief of PTSD symptoms, as sometimes people do when they have severe PTSD, but they don't kill people. Sometimes they'll have a flashback and do aggressive things that they regret very quickly. People who are psychotic can think things are a certain way that cause them to do violent things. But generally, this is where people get very upset with people like me in mental health and go, how you're excusing these horrible actions. And generally, people have got to get help for their mental illness if they're prone to violence. Jesse said this guy was documented as somebody who could be violent. Get help before you hurt somebody. If it's afterwards, it's really going to be on the legal system then. And it's a sad, sad day. Many people are hurt. I think this guy is going to go down for this. We'll be watching this case. Next up.
Okay. Now, how does this relate? Well, look at what we do with our military, the U.S. military, and these patriotic people. No, it's one of those things where we put them throughout the world. You know, if you do good here, we can station you in Germany. You can live in Germany for a while. One of the big selling points for recruitment is, travel the world, get to live and visit different places. And then they stick them over in Iraq or Afghanistan. They have them flying drones sitting here in the United States or in some base, elsewhere. We have Obama wanting to go after ISIS. We have the government sitting here basically antagonizing Russia, which I think is something that's not quite the smartest thing to do. Definitely if you look at national debt and then you look at gold hoarding, who's been doing a lot of gold hoarding. Well, it's been Russia and China. And then when you look at national debts around the world, and you see that, well, Russia might not be doing too bad. Definitely when they got the gold too to back it. It's one of those things that I think people are being played. And do you think Obama has authorized World War III? Well, Christopher Green over at AMTV believes so. And here's a clip from him.
Good afternoon. Today, as part of an international coalition of some 60 nations, including Arab countries, our men and women in uniform continue to fight against ISIL in Iraq and in Syria. More than 2,000 coalition airstrikes have pounded these terrorists. We're disrupting their command and control and supply lines, making it harder for them to move. We're destroying their fighting positions, their tanks, their vehicles, their barracks, their training camps, and the oil and gas facilities and infrastructure that fund their operations. We're taking out their commanders, their fighters, and their leaders. In Iraq, local forces have largely held the line and in some places have pushed ISIL back. In Syria, ISIL failed in its major push to take the town of Kobani, losing countless fighters in the process, fighters who will never again threaten innocent civilians. And we've seen reports of sinking morale among ISIL fighters as they realize the futility of their cause. Now, make no mistake, this is a difficult mission, and it will remain difficult for some time. It's going to take time to dislodge these terrorists, especially from urban areas. But our coalition is on the offensive. ISIL is on the defensive, and ISIL is going to lose.
Before we get started, please check out our sponsor, Lear Capital. That's Lear Capital. Click that link below, give them a call, download a free investor kit, buy gold, buy silver. It's real money, it's real wealth, and it's real protection. The precious metals leader, Lear Capital. Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV Alternative Media Television. So we have a lot in the mix today. The President of the United States yesterday requested the authorization to use military force to fight wars. New wars, by the way. This is coming from the anti-war president in countries and places like Syria. Of course, he's also continued very aggressive airstrikes in Iraq. And I think it's kind of funny because, he ran on this anti-war platform. And he always likes to talk big about no ground troops. He says no ground troops, though it'll be strategic forces, he says. It'll be special forces. It'll be strategery on the ground. It'll be small, contained units. So that means no ground troops, even though the legislation that he's pushed to Congress actually includes his ability to use ground troops. Again, I kind of think it's why they came out with the movie with Chris Kyle, American Sniper, to propagandize the American public, to build support before he went to Congress, even though there's no need to go to Congress at this point because he bypassed Congress to fight these new wars in places like Syria. See, he's just going to Congress now to kind of placate the American public and show that, well, he doesn't really respect the Constitution. He doesn't respect law or our government at all. But, he's kind of go to them second fiddle, placate the little guy to, do something. Again, all of this building to more and more war. And it sets the stage for when Hillary Clinton 2016. When she comes into power, she'll put the ground troops there. You know, it's just a continuation of the Bush era, et cetera. Nothing ever changes. Also in the news, supposedly, according to the mainstream media, after the meeting in Minsk on Wednesday, there was an agreement of sorts between Vladimir Putin of Russia, who the mainstream media and the Pentagon have recently accused of having Asperger's syndrome, which is absolutely insane and asinine, meeting with Poroshenko of Ukraine and also Francois Hollande, sounds like a gay guy, of France, got together and decided on some kind of temporary peace deal. At least that's what's being sold. And I think it's really cute because supposedly the peace deal is on February 15th, right after Valentine's Day. You know, I kind of have this image in my mind of Vladimir Putin and Poroshenko just kissing like, isn't that cute? Now, of course, we know there will be no peace. This is just a maybe short-lived, short-term kind of smoke and mirrors agreement to kind of maybe calm the situation a little bit for Russia. You know, maybe he can kind of, those sanctions that are putting pressure on his economy and the ruble, maybe those will be softened. That's probably the hope. But you see, the other chess piece in addition to Ukraine right now is what's happening in Greece. That's why Russia and Putin have been holding out an olive branch to the Greek people, to their finance minister, and they're offering them potential lending. They're telling the Greek people in Greece, hey, you know, if you can't get a loan from the IMF, if you can't restructure your debt from them, get out of this massive austerity, then we'll do it over here. Russia and China will be your loan shark. We'll be your lender. Maybe even potentially we'll put a couple bases in your country right in the smack dab in the heart of Europe. You see, the problem with Greece isn't that they're any different from the United States. In fact, our balance sheet here in the U.S., once you include derivatives, you know, at the on our books at the Federal Reserve, all these mortgage-backed securities, distressed mortgages make up 60% of what's on the Fed's books right now. You add all the unfunded liabilities, we're no different than Greece. The only difference is, and the problem Greece has, is since joining the euro, which is a very bad idea in the first place, it's crumbling in just about 20 plus years, they can't print their own currency. See, when they can't meet their obligations, in the U.S., we just print. We just print money into infinity. It's like, hey, we're broke and we're insolvent, but because we have the power of the purse and we can print money, we can print this paper out of thin air, we'll just use it to pay our bills. It's not real, and of course it devalues the value of the dollar, it devalues our currency, even though we're on a short-term blip. You know, markets don't move in a straight line. The Greek people can't do that because they've got to go to the euro. Every member state, the 19 member states of the euro, the PIGS nations, for example, have to go to the euro and say, hey, can we print more money? Because we're insolvent like you are. See, that's the only difference. It's just a bunch of shenanigans. The whole thing is an illusion, the whole money system. You know, I was reading that Russia was one of the largest buyers of gold last year. About 12% of their reserves is actual gold bullion. And it's, you know, a testament that these countries are diversifying out of these depreciating fiat currencies into something of real worth, into something of real value, because it's protection from what's about to happen. Of course, with oil prices on the decline, that also artificial. This is the move of the petrodollar that we've been talking about for years now. Since I started this channel about 5 years ago, it's now actually happening. We're moving away from that petrodollar. Oil will not be priced in the U.S. dollar, that single currency, for much longer. It's already being traded, and they're striking these bilateral trade agreements, Russia and China, to do business in these other capacities. It's why there's been the establishment of the Eurasian Union, a counterpoint to the IMF and the World Bank. All of this is shifting. The power is shifting to the east, and that's what Americans don't see. By putting pressure, these sanctions on Russia, we think, Americans do think, we're hurting Russia. Well, yeah, maybe in the short run, maybe it affects the ruble, maybe it affects the economy in the short run, but who we're really hurting is ourselves. We're really hurting America. It's the American people that are suffering long term, because international finance is now swiftly moving out of the hands of Western governments, out of the hands of the Federal Reserve, the United States. And that's going to affect our standard of living here. So, again, as I've said many, many times before, thank your officials. Thank your government for running our finances into the ground, for running an insolvent campaign here in the United States of America. You know, that's the truth. That's what's actually happening right now. Also, oil, I wanted to touch on it, and I spoke to this about a week or two ago. I think we're actually seeing the consolidation that I was speaking to a week or two ago. I think we've actually seen it. I think that we're seeing some normalization in the oil markets, that the fear had gotten much too overblown. In fact, some of the stocks that I mentioned several weeks ago, namely RIG, is up 20%. It was up almost 30% at the close a couple of days ago. So I still think we have these select opportunities, especially in the oil patch right now, with the right companies. So all of this is reaching ahead. Again, don't believe for a minute that the Ukraine crisis is over, that these tensions are over. No way. There is no way on God's green earth that Putin's going to give up the Crimean Peninsula, his ability to have his strategic navy, the Black Sea Fleet, in that part of the world, a principally Russian-speaking part of the country. Again, there's no way that there's going to be anything more than just a short-term, short-lived agreement. And the same thing goes for Greece. Even if a deal is struck with the Eurozone, it will be temporary before the eventual fallout, before the inevitable destruction, fall from the euro, the fall from Greece. And it's not just Greece, it's multiple countries leaving the union. And of course, our politicians, these bureaucrats, are going to tell us that the solution is, they're going to put it on a silver platter, is even a greater political union. Because it's all about pushing towards a central currency, a global order. Some people call it the New World Order. You can call it anything you want, but that's where we're headed. I'm Christopher Green. Get it out everywhere. Make it viral.
Christopher Green, YouTube. You can find him there. Now, here's some facts that I want to touch on. Why I say that playing with Russia and China when it comes to gold or anything when it comes to our monetary policy, it is so. I think in the long run it hurts us the most. It's a very ignorant move, if not intentional. And I do think this is coming to a head when, you hear people talk about the Amero or American Union and needing to get Europe and the United States on board with a world type currency. And all this will play out in the facts that I'm going to give you here. And the first, you have to look at, national debt by country. And you can look all this up. It's on Wikipedia and other different sites that you can go look up. But if you look at rank of country by debt, starting with the most, you have the United States number 1, United Kingdom number 2, Germany number 3, France number 4, Japan number 6, and all these were taken around March of 2014, so they're about a year old, but you get the point. But when you want to look at maybe China, you want to look at Russia. Well, China is number 5. And you think, well, that's really bad. Except if China gets the world currency off of the US dollar. And this is why it's really important that they try to start pushing, in their eyes, things like the Amero or some type of world currency, which we've seen some of them come out saying, this is why we need a world currency. Russia is 20. Now let's compare China. Well, you get a weird sense when you see the number from China anyways that, well, this might be manipulated. But it's not going to be manipulated for the reasons you think at first. You think, well, they're showing a lower debt. I honestly think they're showing a higher debt. Because if they can quickly wipe some of that debt, mysteriously goes away, they're okay. But their debt is $3 trillion even. The Russian Federation is, where is it here? There it is. They're 599 billion 819 million. Well, you compare that to our, 17 trillion. Oh yeah, and we're nice enough to put the 20 cents in, just to let you know. They have ours down to 20 cents. But yeah, 17 trillion, and United Kingdom's at 9 trillion. Germany's at 5 trillion. France is at 5 trillion. And you would think, well, why would United States and United Kingdom be willing to bring on any more debt than they already have? Well, it's not really about the United States or the United Kingdom bringing on more debt. It's actually, why would Germany? Why would France? Why would Japan? Why would these countries want to bring on more debt? And that's when you start getting into gold holdings. And, of course, they have United States is number one in gold holdings. Well, you remember about repatriating the gold to these countries that were wanting their gold back. I think a lot of our gold holdings are falsified in the fact that we're holding other countries' gold. Many people think that a lot of the gold has left. We have excuse me, in tons, 8,133.5 tons of gold in holding. And gold shares of Forex reserves, 71.6%. You have Germany at 3,384.2 tons, 66.4 in Forex reserves. Now this is where a lot of this comes into play. Number 3, you have the IMF with 2,814 no Forex gold share reserves, NA. Then you have Italy, France, Russia, and China. Hold on. Where's Japan? Oh, Japan's down here, number 9. They only have 765 tons. Excuse me. Well, what about the Netherlands and maybe Spain, Ireland, Australia? Let's go ahead and look here. Netherlands is number 10. Then you go all the way down to Spain, number 20. Australia, number 38, they have 79.9 tons. Then it stops at 40. So there's plenty of countries in that list that are stuck with a lot of debt, no gold. Ireland. I don't even think Belgium was mentioned. But China and Russia have a lot of gold with a lot less debt than these other countries. And when they're working with other countries that do have a little bit of gold. Not a lot, but a little bit of gold. You know, people are flipping out about Venezuela. Well, yeah, that's a socialist government. That's what you get. But Venezuela has gold. They have 367.6. They have more than the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom only has 310. But I think, again, you can probably say, hey, you know, the royal family still has gold that they never kind of really get back to the country that they, you know, the royal family, the kings and monarchs had taken. You stay a peasant and we'll keep our gold and we'll give you the illusion of having choice. So when you look at this, it kind of lets you know exactly what game we're playing when we start playing with these. And right now, Bitcoin's at 235. It's been around 235.95 to 235.67. Gold's up, silver's up. And talking about gold and silver, one way you can help Anti-Tyranny News and this broadcast out is when you're buying your precious metals. And I partnered with this company that I personally do my business with. That's Amagi Metals. And they've given me great customer service, great prices. And one thing that they do is they give you a great price even when you're not buying large amounts. A lot of places, unless you're going to buy a large amount, or they even have minimums of what you're able to buy, Amagi Metals doesn't. But they are introducing a tier program for their gold that now will allow you to even get greater deals on gold when you're buying it bulk. But if you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, you can get the same great prices, and at the same time, Anti-Tyranny News gets a kickback from that. That helps us keep this broadcast going, you know, cover operating costs, and you get great deals and great customer service from Amagi Metals. So check them out, antityrannynews.com/Amagi Metals. Sorry, I think I'm kind of losing my voice. You know, this extreme cold weather just sucks it out of you. Give me some cinnamon and honey going or something. Now, one thing you seen in there was the IMF. And I think they're going to be an integral part of bringing together all these countries under a currency to try to battle against Russia and China. But I think we're farther off than they ever planned on us being. And I think Russia and China are seeing that this is also their chance to make a move before something like that is created. I think they see what's trying to be created, and they're trying to create theirs first. It's kind of the new Cold War. It's the new race for space. It's come down to playing the monetary thing, and it's something that benefits only those few people. All of us are going to suffer through it all. And that's why things like audit the Fed should be pushed through. These people should be jailed. Their crimes should be exposed, but I don't think it's going to happen. And, you know, people say that about Henry Kissinger, you know, is he ever going to be brought in front of, you know, judges and jury or any? No. You seen what happened when people like Code Pink, and I think Code Pink is probably not the best one to be out there promoting. I think it really should be more independent, not left or right leaning, more liberty oriented protesters out there calling for that. But, you know, we're going to experience a lot of turmoil through all this because we're really just, you know, caught in the middle of world powers fighting on who's going to control the world. And to go along with that, We Are Change put out one titled Why the Ukraine Peace Talks Will Cause War. They put this out 4 days ago.
The situation in Ukraine is extremely worrisome when you get a full spectrum view of everything that's happening from both sides of the story and not just one side of the story like you're getting from the U.S. mainstream media. In this video, we're going to go through very important, worrying developments, dangerous developments happening in Ukraine right now, and go over quickly how this situation escalated and started. But first of all, in the United States, many people do not know that Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States' son, who was recently caught for cocaine in the Navy, he is also working for the largest private gas producer in Ukraine, Burisma Holdings, which has a license in the Donetsk basin, which the major fighting is happening right now between the rebels and the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military. They have a license to go after and drill for natural gas. Now, this company also has Devon Archer, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's personal friend, and Devon Archer was also his senior advisor during his 2014 presidential election. He is also at Burisma Holdings, this natural gas company, which many people think the fighting is over because Ukraine does not want to lose this very important region. The new Ukrainian government, which is Western-backed, doesn't want to lose this region. That's why the fighting is escalating, and that's why the rebels here are pushing forwards into Ukraine and trying to control their own region. Many people do not know this, but Barack Obama, with Merkel today, said the U.S. will have no other options if negotiations fail between Ukraine and Russia, between the rebels and the Ukrainian military. Many people do not know this, but Ukrainian President Poroshenko says he won't even negotiate with Russia. We reported on this 3 weeks ago. Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, the corrupt official, according to U.S. diplomatic cables, is pushing for war. He just started a mass conscription trying to get 50,000 people to sign up for the military so they could start a war, so they could be ready for war in every sense of the way. These negotiations won't work because Poroshenko does not want them to work. He wants more sanctions against Russia, and he wants more arms from the United States of America. And that's why Obama said he will give arms if negotiations fail. Angela Merkel of Germany is saying, no, this cannot happen. We cannot have more bombs and bullets in this region because we're going to only escalate the conflict and not solve anything. The Ukrainian government right now is focused on war. They do not want peace, but you are not hearing that anywhere else. Now, Angela Merkel, representing Germany and the U.S. had very strong allegiance and alliance to each other for many years. But this has been hurt with the recent revelations that the U.S. is directly spying on Angela Merkel herself. The U.S. Embassy building in Berlin is spying on their government building, Reichstag, which is directly located across the street. Because of this, Barack Obama is less popular than Edward Snowden in Germany. And she is stuck in this situation representing Germany, and she's trying to play the middle ground in this conflict and prevent a full-out war. But what we're seeing is U.S. forces, Russian forces, dividing Ukraine in kind of a proxy satellite war that's happening right now. The U.S. and NATO are not only surrounding Russia with their bases, as you can see clearly demonstrated in this video, but we also know that for a clear fact, John Brennan, the CIA director, was in Kiev a few months ago. We know that the CIA and FBI are sending dozens of advisors into Ukraine to advise the Ukrainian military on how to get rid of and destroy the rebels here. We know the U.S. government is directly assisting, directly working with the Ukrainian military general in this conflict. The U.S. has already been assisting the pro-Western, newly appointed government in Kiev in this conflict. We see MREs, we see clothing, we see the European Union recently passed a law saying that the European Union can send arms and weapons into Ukraine. This is already happening. Ukraine officially wants the U.S. into this conflict. That's why they're not trying to negotiate a peace treaty with what's happening right now in this conflict. And what you're seeing behind the scenes, behind these talks of peace and negotiations, is the buildup.
Now, I want to pause it there for a second because you can't see the map, but this also correlates with the national debts of these countries, and it correlates with the World Bank and the central banking of all these countries being controlled by the same people. You also see that, well, the central banks that are controlled by all the same people basically control the countries too, and this plays into the world order, this progressive idea of having one order over the whole world, united. Basically, we can control everyone instead of just a few. This correlates with that premise, and it's because when you look at a map of the central banking, that's all owned by the same people, and you look at this map that We Are Change is showing that you can't see, it shows NATO bases, and there's certain spots that you don't see a NATO base. Russia, China, India, Iran, Libya. There's one in Iraq. It's one of those things that when you start looking at how the world powers operate and the correlation with wars, you start seeing it. And I think we're at basically a world war, a Cold War between Western and Eastern and Northern, however you want to call it. But let me go ahead and continue this clip here.
Of NATO. Just 2 days ago, NATO announced that they're having a rapid reaction force with 5,000 members ready to go at any time to be ready at any conflict on the eastern border against Russia. Russia is answering back by setting up a military base in Cyprus, which is only 40 kilometers from the UK NATO base. These two major forces, these two major world powers are facing off between each other. Russia is bolstering and showing their military prowess by also conducting nuclear submarine exercises beneath the North Pole. So you see these forces arming up. How do we get here? How did this happen? And I think Dennis Kucinich actually explains it very well. He was recently on Bill O'Reilly, and he was asked what he would do different in this Ukrainian conflict. And Dennis Kucinich, the former congressman, former statesman, said, "What I do is not have USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy working with the U.S. taxpayers' money to knock off an elected government in Ukraine, which is what they did," Kucinich answered. "I would try to force the people of Ukraine. I wouldn't try to force the people of Ukraine into a deal with NATO against their interest or into a deal with the European Union, which is against their economic interest." And that's exactly what happened. There's even reports in the Ukrainian parliament with parliament officials saying how 300 people worked within the U.S. embassy to promote social media, to provoke protests that led to the coup. So what happened in Ukraine? Ukraine had a pro-Russian government. Ukraine and Russia are very interlinked economically. There was major protests in Kiev that were backed by the European Union, NATO, and the United States. The protesters were trying to get rid of their corrupt president, and they were successful in doing that by implementing techniques by taking over a large square. John McCain showed up to that square. The U.S. mainstream media talked about how these freedom fighters are taking over land. The conflict escalated with shootings on both sides, and the Ukrainian government was overthrown. They put in a new Western corrupt figure, Poroshenko, with their new elections, which according to U.S. diplomatic cables that were released by WikiLeaks show Poroshenko as a corrupt figure, but he's in Washington's pocket since 2006. So now this newly elected government is going to be more favorable towards the European Union, towards the West, towards NATO. People on the East here in Ukraine said, "What? We do not want to be a part of this. We do not want to be a part of the European Union. We want to be more strongly connected to Russia because Russia is closer to us." They started protesting and using similar techniques that people in Kiev did to overthrow their government. The U.S. and the mainstream media called them terrorists. Meanwhile, they called these protesters freedom fighters. In the meantime, Russia said, well, we're just going to take over Crimea, and took their military and took over this very key political land base where they have a strong military presence, and they're also boosting their military presence right now, which called for the U.S. to call for sanctions against Russia, and which also put the two countries against each other. So we're seeing a tug of war between the U.S. NATO forces trying to take Ukraine, trying to make them a part of the European Union, trying to make them an ally. Russia's still holding this key political ally because there's a lot of natural gas here. The rebels are fighting back, and of course, both of these sides are being funded by these huge world powers, and it's a proxy World War III unfolding right in front of us with no end in sight. The conflict is escalating right now with these two major world powers facing off against each other, bolstering their military might all over the place. And we reported on this 3 weeks ago. Now it's finally coming to fruition. The mainstream media is still reporting about peace treaties and negotiations. Meanwhile, we know the corrupt figure, the current president of Ukraine, is not even interested in this. We will see how this will unfold, especially with Barack Obama saying when these peace treaties do not unfold, they will have to arm the Ukrainians.
I'm going to stop it there. We are Change YouTube. And you see Merkel running around trying to, stop. No, it's not going to happen. She's sitting there, having a press conference with Obama, and then goes and does a peace thing with Russia and Ukraine. And she's trying, but I don't think you're going to have it. And, I've said this before, I don't think there's a winning side. The problem is constantly just putting in a new corrupt institution. It just doesn't work. It's a bubble within itself. It's one of those things that it's not going to amount to more freedom, more liberty, more prosperity, to the point that you would want it to. You might see a better economy. They might have better clothing and newer cars, but they will give up a lot for that. And that's what we have in America. We've given up so much for the fancy things. And I'm not against having fancy things. It's just that if we look at a lot of who we're getting this stuff from, these people have manipulated and extorted us through government and government cooperation and government extortion for their own benefits. All of these people have really been robbing from us because they've been manipulating the system for their financial and empowerment benefits. There's just no way around that. And, that's why we should support, more local mom and pop and things like that. It's one of those things that, the entrepreneurs out there that are just trying to make it for themselves. And I hope that more entrepreneurs out there don't do what many do. And this is something that, you're going to do it for your benefit, and I understand that. But it hurts the name of something that you've created. It hurts the reputation, I think, of it. And that's selling out to a corporation and going, let them take it. They gave me a lump sum. I made this much money off of it. I'll be happy. And that's great. But I think when you sell out to these big corporations, just give them that continuation on monopoly over certain things, which it's not a monopoly of, the way we thought of it before. Before, look at Shell Oil, when Rockefeller, or not Shell, but Standard Oil, my bad. But Standard Oil and then Rockefeller. You look at something like that, we think of that as a monopoly on oil. But what happened afterwards was a manipulation on the consciousness of people. And that was, they broke up that monopoly. And that's what government did. They stopped that monopoly. But what people don't understand is all the fragments of Standard Oil still were majority owned by Rockefeller. Just other people had shares in it. What does that kind of amount to? Well, government extortion. Nope. We think that these friends of ours should be able to buy into that and benefit off of that company that you've created and made a monopoly off of. And Rockefeller also agreed, because by doing this, it would ensure that people wouldn't be able to reach his level. And, whether it be the Morgans, the Carnegies, all these people were, monopolists. And they were trying to figure out a way to keep their monopolies. And when they understood that people didn't like seeing one person own everything, kind of reminded them of monarchs or dynasties or emperors, or, it kind of resembled that. They have all the money, all the power. So they had to break that illusion. And, by doing the breakup of Standard Oil, they were able to create that illusion. And, these elitists, they also seen that, well, by doing this, we also kind of prove that government could be the one thing that can break our back. Because they can then just do whatever they want and create, a law. And how can we control them? Now they're not worried about the little person starting a business because they'll never be able to get that business up to the point that they had their companies. And now they own majority share in all those companies that basically retain they have their subsidiaries that come down from them and their subsidiaries, and it makes it look like there's a whole bunch of companies out there. And it's not. When you look at, well, how are we going to stop the one thing that can stop us? How can we control that mechanism? Let's have a meeting at Jekyll Island. And that's where the Federal Reserve System came into being. That's where it was created. And by gaining control of the monetary policy and the issuing of a country's currency, they gain control. Excuse me. So, when they were done creating the illusion that there wasn't a monopoly anymore, they had to go after the last thing. And, it's right back into what John Adams said, there are two ways to conquer and enslave a country. One is by the sword, the other is by debt. And people get old of war. So when a country gets old of war, they go after the debt. And, right now we're sitting at 18 trillion. 18 trillion. Isn't that amazing? $18 trillion, and they have the audacity to say that's your debt. Okay, I have one that I'm going to cover, continue on kind of the economy element of tonight's broadcast. What was that? Okay. I think we're still good. Okay. Two more harbingers of financial doom that mirror the crisis of 2008. And this is from the economiccollapseblog.com. .com. Okay. The stock markets continue to flirt with new record highs, but the signs that we could be on the precipice of the next major financial crisis continue to mount. A couple days ago, I discussed the fact that the U.S. dollar is experiencing a tremendous surge in value, just like it did in the months prior to the financial crisis of 2008. And previously, I have detailed how the price of oil has collapsed. Prices for industrial commodities are tanking, and market behavior is becoming extremely choppy. All these are things that we witnessed just before the last market crash as well. It is also important to note that orders for durable goods are declining, and the um, Baltic dry index has dropped to the lowest level on record. So, does all of this mean that the stock market is guaranteed to crash in 2015? No, of course not, but we are looking for our probabilities. We are looking for patterns. There are multiple warning signs that have popped up repeatedly just prior to previous financial crashes, and many of those same warning signs are now appearing once again. One of these warning signs that I have not discussed previously is the wholesale inventories to sales ratio. When the economic activity starts to slow down, inventory tends to get backed up. And that is precisely what is happening right now. In fact, as Wolf Richard recently wrote about, the wholesale inventories to sales ratio has not hit a level that we have not seen since last recession. Has now hit a level that we have not seen since last recession. Okay. It says here in December, the wholesale inventory ratio reached 1.22 after rising constantly since July last year when it was 1.17. It is now at the highest and worst level since September 2009 as the financial crisis was winding down. Another sign that I find extremely interesting is the behavior of the yield on 10-year U.S. Treasury notes. As Jeff Clark recently explained, we usually see a spike in the 10-year Treasury yield about the time the market is peaking before a crash. The 10-year Treasury note yield bottomed on January 30th at 1.65%. Today it is at 2. That's a 35 base point spike, a jump of 21% in less than 2 weeks. Once again, just because something has happened in the past does not mean that it will happen in the future, but the fact that so many red flags are appearing all at once has got to give a rational person reason for concern. And you can read the rest of that at the economiccollapseblog.com. Now, like you said, it doesn't mean that we're going to, but we will see some type of turmoil in the market. It's going to happen. And when bubbles are created, there's only one way for it to go. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on here. Give me a second. Okay. This is one of the latest from Ben Swan, benswan.com. And this one is interview killing of 3 Muslim students at UNC, an act of terrorism. The family of 3 Muslim college students shot execution style over a parking dispute says their loved ones were killed because of their religion. All 3 of the victims, Babe Barak, Barakat, 23, Yusur Abu Salah, 21, and Razan Abu Salah, 19, were Muslims, the victims of a newly wed couple, and the bride's younger sister were shot in the head. The man who turned himself in for the shooting, 46-year-old Craig Stephen Hicks, has been charged with murder. Hicks claims that he killed all 3 students over an ongoing dispute regarding parking. No matter why he did it, that shouldn't even be it. Let's stop going, he did it for this reason, he did it for this reason. Unless you did it in a self-defense, then any other reason should be, thrown out the window. And I think that's the problem with how we approach a lot of this. But hate crime, act of terrorism, I personally don't believe so. But here's an interview.
Well, one of the major issues surrounding this story surrounds the question of whether the shooting was simply over a parking dispute or, as Manny mentioned, was religion a factor. A Facebook profile bearing Craig Hicks' name and photo paints a portrait of a vehement atheist who shared anti-Muslim and anti-Christian posts and links. Also, the fact that all 3 victims were shot in the head execution style is leading many to believe that this was, in fact, a hate crime. To provide more insight on this story, I spoke earlier with Linda Sarsour, a spokesperson for the family, and I began by asking her if the family is convinced that this was, in fact, a hate crime. So, Linda, is the family convinced that this was a hate crime?
Yes, the family is absolutely convinced that this is a hate crime based on conversations that the father had with his daughter about a very hateful neighbor. She told her father, I know that he hates me for who I am and for what I'm wearing. He used to see them walking into the apartment complex and have his hand on a very visible gun in a holster. And that plus very interesting social media post seems he's a very extremist anti-theist, so he's very anti any religion or anti-religious people.
I want to play a soundbite of Hicks' wife and what she told the media yesterday. Let's play that.
I can say with my absolute belief that this incident had nothing to do with religion or victims' faith, but in fact was related to the long-standing parking disputes that my husband had with the neighbors. And our neighbors are various religions, races, and creeds.
She says that has nothing to do with religion, and yet the fact that these 3 young people were gunned down execution style, all shot in the head, does not seem to necessarily correlate with the idea of a crime of passion over a parking issue. Am I wrong?
It's actually quite offensive when you're telling families that their 3 children were murdered execution style, pronounced dead on the scene over a parking space. You have to have a lot of hate in your heart for you to be able to murder young students in the way that they were murdered.
There's been a remarkable show of support, certainly on the UNC campus. Thousands of friends, relatives, strangers packing the Central Campus Plaza known as the Pit for a vigil last night. What kind of support has the family been receiving from the community?
The family has been receiving an outpouring of support from every corner of this country, from people of all religious backgrounds, students, clergy. We've had companies reaching out to us, people who are wanting to create donation pages, young people who are putting together events to raise money for Syrian refugees, just as Diya Barakat, one of the victims, that was kind of his thing. He was spending a lot of time and energy raising money for refugees and to go on a trip actually to Turkey to work with refugees. So the support has been immense, and it just shows the hope and the potential of us as a country to unite against hate.
How does the family feel about the way this story is being covered in the media? For instance, if we were to reverse the situation, it was a Muslim man who shot 3 white college students. How do you think the coverage would play out? Would it be any different than what we're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as the incident happened, you had 3 dead college students, regardless of what their race was, there should have been media coverage. And there was no media coverage until people went on social media and raised their voices, tagging all the mainstream media outlets, until there was really a buzz about this. And like you said, if the perpetrator was Muslim, we would be having nonstop coverage of his religion, who he's affiliated with, where did he work, who did he speak to? And there really hasn't been that much focus. I'm happy that the focus now has been on these 3 lives, on their beautiful lives, full lives that they've lived, on their families. And that's the story you want to tell, because these were Americans, but not only were they Americans, they were extraordinary Americans who gave back to their community, were successful students, and that's how their families want them to be remembered.
If the situation were reversed, would this be called an act of terrorism? Do you believe that in this case it should be called an act of terrorism?
It's absolutely an act of terrorism. Terrorism is a crime that has political or religious motivations behind it. This guy was an anti-theist. If you look at some of his social media posts, he was anti-religion, anti-religious people. These young women were wearing headscarves. They were identifiably Muslim. And we should be calling domestic terrorism regardless of who the perpetrator is or who the victims are. And in this case, this absolutely, to me, is a domestic terrorism case.
Well, certainly our condolences to the family. Family spokesperson Linda Sarsour, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there's a lot that I disagree with there. It's not a terrorism, domestic terrorism. The only legal term that will ever refer to is the ability for government to take your rights away. And if someone's guilty, well, you know, they should be found guilty and the evidence should show it, and then they are proven that they abridged someone else's rights, and then they have to pay for that crime. But by putting the label terrorism on it, it'll stop due process. And even though, you know, he might have been caught red-handed and, you know, he admitted to it, due process still needs to be there. Otherwise, you put that label of terrorism on it, and then you're going to have to address that when you're accused of something. Well, if you're accused, you had nothing to do with it, but you're accused of, you know, a murder, you know, drinking, driving, or whatever. And they go, well, because, you know, we believe it to be a hate crime because, well, whatever reason, you know, it's one of those things that they could just label you a terrorist and no due process. And that's where the danger of that comes into play. And so the same works out for calling it a hate crime. Well, if you're not acting in a defensive way, you're being the offensive person, you're the one that's causing the harm, initiating the harm, all of it's hate crime. We just need to call it what it is, and that is a crime against someone, and give people due process. And our court systems are messed up by labeling them a domestic terrorist and taking away any due process, even if you believe it's the illusion of due process, doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, that we would then be accepting of something like that. And if you want to start throwing around domestic terrorists, you know, well, who might be the biggest domestic? Oh, people that attack cops and stuff. People like that. Well, here's one from the freethoughtproject.com. So far this year, all identified cop killers were also cops. Tacoma, Texas, an officer responding to a domestic disturbance at a North Texas resident shot and killed off-duty sheriff's deputy Larry Holster, 41, shortly after midnight. Police were tight-lipped about the incident, other than to say the Texas Rangers are leading the investigation in a news conference Monday morning. Sheriff Paul Cunningham said Hofstadter was a good person, had been a law enforcement officer since 2000, and that being a sheriff's deputy was everything to him, according to NBC5. Cunningham added that Hofstadter Princeberg was married and had 3 children. We just want to give our condolences and sympathies to everybody involved, Cunningham said. This is not the first time in recent weeks where we have seen the thin blue line injuring its own. At the end of January, we reported on a Yonkers police officer who shot a suicidal officer from another precinct, claiming he feared for his safety. Earlier in January, we also reported undercover Albuquerque police officer who was shot by another officer during a drug bust over $60 worth of meth. The media called it a tragic accident, while in reality it was another example of police shooting someone who poses no threat to them. In another tragic incident, John Ballard Gorman was shot and killed by a fellow officer during a training exercise in Tunica, Missouri. Last month, the officer who shot Gorman failed to switch out his weapon for a training weapon and fired a real round into his fellow officer, killing him. While 116 citizens have been killed at the hands of law enforcement this year, the only shooting deaths of officers this year have been attributed to fellow officers. The recent chorus from cops, the Blue Lives Matter, seems to ring hollow, as it isn't officers that are being gunned down in the streets on a daily basis by citizens. Judging from the incidents that have transpired so far this year, it seems the greatest deadly threat to blue lives is other blue lives. So, not only are cops killing citizens, they're killing their own. And I think a lot of that, again, goes back to their training. And through all this, we have another threat coming. Definitely, if you see what Hollywood's doing. Another one from the freethoughtproject.com. Hollywood is lobbying government to put you in prison for common online activity. Go to prison for sharing files. That's what Hollywood wants, the secret TPP deal. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement poses massive threats to users in a dizzying number of ways. It will force other TPP signatories to accept the United States excessive copyright terms of a minimum of life of the author plus 70 years, while locking the U.S. to the same lengths, so it will be harder to shorten them in the future. It contains extreme DRM anti-circumvented provisions that will make it a crime to tinker with, hack, resell, preserve, otherwise control any number of digital files and devices that you own. The TPP will encourage ISPs to monitor and police their users, likely leading to more censorship measures such as blockage and filtering of content online in the name of copyright enforcement. And the most recent leak of the TPP's intellectual property chapter, we found an even more alarming provision on trade secrets that could be used to crack down on journalists and whistleblowers who report on corporate wrongdoing. Here we'd like to explore yet another set of rules in TPP that will chill users' rights. There are criminal enforcement provisions which, based upon the latest leak from May 2014, is still a contested and unresolved issue. It's about whether users could be jailed or hit with debilitating fines over allegations of copyright infringement. Dangerously low threshold of criminality. The U.S. is pushing for a dangerous, broad definition of criminal violation of copyright, where even non-commercial activities could get people convicted of a crime. The leak also shows that Canada has opposed this definition. Canada supports language in which criminal remedies would only apply to cases where someone infringed explicitly for commercial purposes. The definition is crucial. Commercial infringement, where an infringer sells unauthorized copies of content for financial gain, is and should be a crime, but that's not what the U.S. is pushing for. It's trying to get language passed in TPP that would make a criminal out of anyone who simply shares or otherwise makes available copyrighted works on a commercial scale. On a commercial scale. Not for commercial benefit, but on a scale that could equal commercial. So if you're doing something just, you're paying to have it done, you could be a criminal because you did it on a large scale that they consider a commercial scale, and what that scale will be, who knows. But as anyone who has ever had a meme go viral knows, it is very easy to distribute content on a commercial scale online, even without it being a money-making operation. That means fans who distribute subtitles to foreign movies or anime, or archivists and librarians who preserve and upload old books, videos, games, or music go to jail or face huge fines for their work. Someone who makes a remix film and puts it online could be under threat. Such a broad definition is ripe for abuse, and we've seen such abuse happen many times before. Fair use and other copyright exemptions and limitation frameworks like fair dealing have been under constant attack by right shoulder groups who try to undermine and chip away at our rights as users to do things with copyrighted content. Given this reality, the criminal enforcement rules could go further to intimidate and discourage users from exercising their rights to use and share content for purposes such as parody, education, and access to the disabled. Penalties that must be sufficiently high. The penalties themselves could be enough to intimidate and punish users in a way that is grossly disproportionate to the crime. Based upon the leak, which showed no opposition in key sections, it seems TPP negotiators have already agreed to more vague provisions that would oblige countries to enact prison sentences and monetary fines that are sufficiently high to deter people from infringing again. Here's the text. Penalties that include sentences of imprisonment as well as monetary fines sufficiently high to provide a deterrent to future acts of infringement consistently with the level of penalties applied for crimes of a corresponding gravity. Already in many countries, criminal punishment for copyright grossly outweighs penalties for acts that are comparatively more harmful to others. So the question as to what crimes copyright infringement corresponds to in gravity is obscure. What's more alarming is that countries without existing criminal penalties or whose penalties are not sufficiently high to satisfy the U.S. government may be forced to enact harsher rules. The U.S. trade representatives could use the certification process at the behest of right shoulder groups to arm twist nations into passing more severe penalties, even after the TPP is signed and ratified. The U.S. Trade Representative has had a long history of pressuring other nations into enacting extreme IP policies, so it would not be out of the realm of possibility. Property seizure and asset forfeiture. The TPP's copyright provisions even require countries to enable judges to unilaterally order the seizure, destruction, or forfeiture of anything that can be traceable to infringing activity. Has been used in the creation of pirated copyright goods, or is documentary evidence relevant to the alleged offense. So, evidence relevant to the alleged offense that you might have documented can be destroyed. Under such obligations, law enforcement could become ever more empowered to seize laptop servers or even domain names. Domain name seizure in the name of copyright enforcement is not new to us in the U.S., nor to people running websites from abroad, but these provisions open the door to the passage of even more oppressive measures to enable governments to get an order from the judge to seize websites and devices. The provision also says that the government can act even without a formal complaint from the copyright holder. So in places where the government chooses to use the force of copyright to censor its critics, this could be even more disastrous. Criminalization of getting around DRM. Give me a second. We've continued to raise this issue, but it's always worth mentioning. The TPP exports the United States criminal laws on digital rights management, or DRM. The TPP could lead to policies where users will be charged with crimes for circumventing or sharing knowledge or tools on how to circumvent DRM for financial gain, as long as they have reasonable ground to know that it's illegal to do so. Chile, however, opposes this vague language because it could lead to criminal penalties for innocent users. The most recent leak of the intellectual property chapter revealed new exemptions that could let public interest organizations such as libraries and educational institutions get around DRM to access copyrighted content for uses protected by fair use or fair dealing, or content that might simply be in the public domain. But even if it's legal, it would be difficult for them to get around DRM since they may not be equipped with the knowledge to do it on their own. If someone else tries to do a public service for them by creating these tools for legally protected purposes, they could still be put in jail or face huge fines. Conclusion. Like the various other digital copyright enforcement provisions in TPP, the criminal enforcement language loosely reflects the United States DMCA, but is abstract enough that the U.S. can pressure other nations to enact rules that are much worse for users. It's therefore far from comforting when the White House claims that the TPP's copyright rules would not change U.S. law. We are still exporting bad rules to other nations while binding ourselves to obligations that may prevent U.S. lawmakers from reforming it for the better. These rules were passed in the U.S. through cycles of corrupt policy laundering. Now the TPP is the latest step in this trend of increasingly draconian copyright rules passing through corporate captured processes. These Excessive criminal copyright rules are what we get when big content has access to powerful, secretive rule-making institutions. We get rules that would send users to prison, force them to pay debilitating fines, and have their property seized or destroyed in the name of copyright enforcement. This is yet another reason we need to stop the TPP to put an end to the seemingly endless progression towards even more chilling copyright restrictions and enforcement. If you are in the U.S., please call your representative to oppose fast track for TPP and other undemocratic trade deals with harmful digital policies. So, again, just another example of how government and corporations keep a monopoly on things. They will throw you under the bus, literally, to keep their power and their wealth. Okay, let's see what time we got. We're kind of getting towards the end of the broadcast here. Okay. I was going to play another clip. I think I'll save that for next week if I get to it. It's going to be too long. But don't worry. I have one here from thelibertybeat.com. Federal government increased cannabis use, not the cause of car accidents. Now, I don't know if you remember, they were pretty stupid commercials, but they had those anti-marijuana public announcement type commercials. They had the kids rolling up to a drive-through or something, smoking, and the car was smoked out where they couldn't see, and they ran over a little girl. Yeah. Well, according to this, it's not the cause of car accidents. Kind of a little bit contradictory to what their commercials that they put out against marijuana. It says a new federal report has found that cannabis use does not contribute to increased risk of car crashes. Researchers studied car accidents in Virginia Beach, Virginia, during a 20-month period and found no evidence suggesting drivers with cannabis were more likely to experience car accidents. Despite the fact that drivers who tested positive for cannabis were involved in more accidents, the researchers concluded cannabis use did not increase the risk. In comparison, drivers with an alcohol content of 0.08 in their system were around 4 times as likely to be involved with accidents than sober drivers. The report was released by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And that originally came out of the Hill, but I got that out of the Liberty Beat. Okay, and I had another one here out of the Liberty Beat I want to bring up if I can find the tab. Got too many tabs open. Okay, this one kind of more related to the weather. Many people might follow geoengineering. well, we've been hearing the, geoengineers out there talking about, well, we should geoengineer the climate. We can reduce carbon emissions. Well, here, major scientists conclude geoengineering is not a solution for reducing carbon emissions. An international committee of scientists have released a report stating that geoengineering techniques are not a viable alternative to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to combat the effects of climate change. The committee report called the further research and understanding of various geoengineering techniques include carbon dioxide removal schemes and solar radiation management before implementation. The scientists found that solar radiation management or albedo modification techniques are likely to present serious known and possible unknown environmental, social, and political risks, including the possibility of being deployed unilaterally. The report was sponsored by the National Academy of Science, the U.S. Intelligence Committee, NASA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the U.S. Department of Energy. And that was out of www.nationalacademies.org. And you can find it at thelibertybeat.com. And there was one I seen from Jeffrey Tucker, and it's over at tucker.liberty.me. 50 Shades of Government. Every politically active group wants something from government. Government is happy to oblige, even more obvious in the election season. Another way to put it, government has lots to give in the ways of laws, loot, privileges, protections, and punishments. Every pressure group and political party has an idea about how its power over us needs to be used. Does it make any difference who gets the loot? Really? Not really. Not to you and me. Whether you are taxed to make bike paths in Palo Alto or to fund missions in Kabul, or you are still denied use of your money so that politicians and bureaucrats can realize their dreams. Whether the regulations say that you can't work for less than $10 an hour or that you can't buy raw milk at any price, your freedom to make contracts is still being compromised. We can and will argue intermittently about how government ought to be used. Should government prevent gay people from contracting unions or stop private companies from discriminating against people who choose gay unions? Either way, the state is being brought in to tell people what they can and can't do. In this sense, the left and the right have more in common than either side cares to admit. Both have a plan for how the state can better manage the social order. Should tobacco be banned or bailed out? Should banks be made too big to fail or badgered with regulatory restrictions so they can't do real business? Should corporations be protected and subsidized, or should they be taxed within an inch of their lives? Should fatty foods be mandated as part of a national diet or kept off the menu as a health hazard? These are the great debates of our time, but these are actually not fundamental debates at all. Either way, the only real winner here is government, its agents, its public spokesmen, its powers, and its place in our lives and culture. This is what remains unquestioned. Should seniors be able to rob young people of their earnings in order to enjoy a luxurious retirement? Or should seniors be especially taxed and punished for using more than their fair share of society's health care resources? Whichever way that debate ends up, liberty itself suffers and the property rights of everybody are less secure. Should religious people be able to control what we watch, read, and smoke, or should secular people be able to impose laws that keep religious people from having too much influence over our culture? Either way, government is being granted more control over the social order than it should have. This is the great tragedy of living under Leviathan. People have different ideas about how it ought to conduct its affairs. Who should be rewarded? Who should be punished? Who gets the privileges? Who must bear the cost? It becomes a war of pressure groups, everyone seeking to live at the expense of everyone else. What is this thing we call government? It consists of the gang that an institutional structure that makes the rules, enforces the rules, and lives by the rules that are different from those it imposes on the rest of the population. It can't steal, but government can. Or we can't steal, but government can. We can't kill, but government can. We can't counterfeit, kidnap, and engage in fraud, but government can. This thing called government obviously has a strong interest in maintaining its power, prestige, and funding. This is true no matter what the structure of the government happens to be. Oligarchy, absolute monarchy, constitutional monarchy, presidential republic, parliamentary republic, democracy. All of them have one thing in common. They create a special case of citizens that live at the expense of everyone else. In a democracy, especially, government enlists us all in its cause. So long as people are arguing about how to use the government and not whether it should be used to achieve social and economic goals at all, the government comes out the winner. All the pressure groups are really just rewarding the political class, transferring power and money from us to them. Precisely what the excuse is. And it changes all the time, sometimes subtly and sometimes dramatically. Doesn't matter to government. Government is a chameleon, pleased to wear any cultural or ideological cloak to blend in with social and cultural surroundings. In a wrangling struggle, grasping dog-eat-dog democracy like ours, we are 50 shades of government, each suitable for a particular time and place, each adapted to purposes of the movement. All with the interest of firming up control by the ruling class. This is what the political spectrum is all about. Government dominates and we submit. It puts us in bondage and we obey its discipline. There's also got to be a good excuse or else we would never put up with this. We have to believe that government is, in some way, at some level, doing something that pleases us. Maybe even the government is us. People say that the age of faith of the Middle Ages, religious differences led to wars. Historians have looked carefully, have noticed something different. Governments that want wars are happy to use religion as the excuse. And so it is today in the age of science. We get scientific social planning in which experts are supposed to tell the people with their hands on the controls how to use them. But whether the excuse is religion or science, security or environment, nationalism or internationalism, it doesn't matter to the rest of us. The rights and liberties of the people paying the bill are forever being sacrificed to someone else's political agenda. So we drag ourselves to the voting booth and look at the names and try to remember what these various people promised to do for us and to us if we ratify their right to rule. Having done so, we are told that we've made our choice and now we must live with it. But maybe it's not really a choice at all. Maybe it's time to let go of our dependency and reject the entire master-slave relationship that is the whole basis of the system itself. 50 Shades of Government has been the bestseller for hundreds of years. It's time that the governed write an entirely new book. And that's from Jeffrey Tucker at liberty.me, tucker.liberty.me, and you can find it a lot quicker. And I think this one article it's not a new idea, but it's a well explained idea. It's a well contrast to reality and the fallacy that most people live in. And that fallacy is that you have choice when really you're still voting on someone to rule. And the whole idea of needing a government, I think, should be an outdated concept by now. And it's so sad not to see the human race embrace the idea of self-governance, self-responsibility, and things like the non-aggression principle, when it's really just so apparent that government through thousands of years has proven itself to be the enemy of the free people, because its inherent nature is to have power. And when it's going to have that inherent nature, it has to have power to be able to operate. Therefore, it's going to do nothing but want to gain more power. And then the people that are involved in it will gain financial and powerful benefits. And we see that through where the Congress is allowed to do insider trading, and no one seems worried about it. And that's a sad look that there isn't more outcry, because the lack of outcry says that there are still too many people locked in this fallacy. And, more and more people that I've talked to, I still get a mixed result, but it seems more and more people are willing to listen to you long enough to hear the full explanation, and bing, something lights up in their head. And I just hope that this continues to grow, because we're not only breaking through the corruption of government, the corruption of the elitists, the corruption of corporations. We're breaking through a tradition in the human race that is a tradition that in result brings a lot of death. And even without government, though, the same things that we complain that government does, extort money, kill people, and cage people like animals, and rob them, extort them. Without government, we can't succumb to that same thing, and we can't allow some other institutional organization to be created to do the exact same thing, because then they are nothing more than government. Government is nothing more than a organization or a mafia that has created a fallacy of power over others. And problem with government is they basically have the monopoly on that. They are the monopolist of mafia. And when the monopolist of corporation or private business needs something done, they go to the monopolist of the mafia. The most powerful mafia figures, which is government. And usually they help write bills, lobby to get them passed, put propaganda out there. When it gets passed, you find out that it restricts you as an individual or you as a small business owner, but does nothing to restrict the big corporations. If anything, it empowers those big corporations, and you find out, oh yeah, because they helped write it. And we've seen the same thing with Obamacare and AARP. And it will continue to happen unless we break this fallacy of government. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV for all the great broadcasts coming up next. And go to UCY.TV. Check out the UCY store. Thank you. Take care.